My Jeep was parked exactly where it always was, inside my fenced driveway, locked, secure, and untouched. At least that's what I thought. Then I heard metal snapping. I ran outside and saw Karen, the self-appointed queen of our HOA, standing there with a bolt cutter in her hands, panting like she'd just finished a workout. The lock on my gate lay broken on the ground. And my Jeep? She had already hooked it to a tow truck. This vehicle violates HOA color standards. She barked. It's being confiscated immediately. Confiscated? Since when did Karen think she worked for the government? I told her she had no right to touch my property. She smirked and waved a clipboard at me. I make the rules here, she said. Next time, follow them. But Karen had made one massive mistake. That Jeep she was trying to steal? It wasn't just mine. It was registered to a special police task force, undercover, active, and very protective of their equipment. And just 60 seconds after she cut that lock, 3 unmarked SUVs rolled up behind her. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. And hit subscribe for more stories where HOA tyrants get exactly what they deserve. The sound didn't make sense at first. It was sharp, metallic, and violent enough to travel through my living room walls. For a moment I thought it was a construction crew, maybe someone replacing a fence or dropping a heavy tool. But then I heard a second snap, louder, closer, deliberate. That sound didn't belong to a toolbox. It belonged to someone breaking something. I stepped outside, expecting to find nothing more than a fallen branch or a neighbor repairing something in their yard. Instead, I froze halfway down my porch steps. Karen, the self-declared queen of our HOA, stood in my driveway with her face red, her breath heavy, and her hands gripping a pair of oversized bolt cutters. She looked like she had been wrestling with an enemy, and the enemy was my gate lock, which now lay broken on the gravel like a piece of trash she had ripped apart. Behind her, a tow truck sat rumbling, its engine coughing smoke into the morning air. The driver leaned on his seatbelt nervously, unsure whether he was helping a lawful operation or participating in something illegal. The hook was already lowered, sitting dangerously close to the front axle of my Jeep. My Jeep. The one thing I kept locked behind a fence for a reason. The one vehicle I never let anyone touch without permission. The one that didn't technically belong to me alone. It belonged to the task force. The moment I stepped off my porch and into the driveway, Karen spun around like a villain caught mid-crime. But she didn't look guilty. She looked victorious. Oh, perfect timing, she snapped. You can watch the tow so you know I mean business. Your Jeep is being confiscated for violating HOA color standards. I blinked, unable to believe what I was hearing. Confiscated? You broke into my property, Karen. That gate was locked for a reason. She rolled her eyes in a wide, dramatic arc. Maybe if you actually followed the community guidelines, I wouldn't have to take action. That, she pointed to my Jeep as if it were radioactive, is not an approved color. Black, matte, intimidating, completely unacceptable. You were warned. I didn't receive any warning, I said. She smirked. Oh, well, I don't control the mail. Now move aside. I'm running a community here. Her confidence didn't come from power. It came from entitlement. She believed her clipboard gave her the same authority as a judge and jury. She believed she could bend rules, break locks, and take anything that offended her sense of control. And today, that target was my Jeep. She raised the bolt cutter again, as if she might cut something else just for fun. The tow truck driver finally stepped out, rubbing the back of his neck. Ma'am, he's the owner. Maybe we should... Oh, shut up, Karen snapped. You're being paid to tow. Not to think... He raised both hands and backed off, just saying, and you, she pointed at me, will receive a fine for blocking a community officer during an enforcement procedure. I stared at her. Karen, you're not an officer. She planted one hand on her hip. I am the authority here. At that moment, I almost laughed. She had no idea how absurd she sounded. But something heavier pressed on my mind, the deeper danger she had walked into, because she hadn't just broken into my property. She hadn't just cut a lock. She hadn't just tried to tow a personal Jeep. She had handled, damaged, and attempted to seize a police task force vehicle with coded communication devices, tactical compartments, and equipment trackers inside. Equipment she had no right to touch. Equipment the task force monitored constantly. And right now, the moment she snapped that lock open, trackers inside the Jeep sent notifications to the department. I gave her one last warning. Karen, listen to me carefully. You need to stop now. She smirked again, adjusting her ridiculous HOA badge lanyard as if it meant something. Oh, I'm just getting started. And guess what? There's nothing you can... She never finished the sentence. A deep vibration rolled through the neighborhood, the unmistakable growl of high-powered engines, not one, not two, Three black unmarked SUVs flew down the street, tires humming against the pavement with speed and precision only professional drivers had. They turned into my cul-de-sac like a coordinated strike team. The tow truck driver stumbled backward. Karen's smirk faded instantly. Her bolt cutters slipped from her hands and crashed onto the concrete. Doors flew open, boots hit the ground, and heavily trained task force officers stepped out with purpose, scanning the yard, the broken lock, the raised tow truck arm, and finally, Karen. One of them looked at the Jeep, then at me, then at Karen. His jaw tightened. Who broke the lock? Karen pointed straight at me. Unbelievably, him. He's trying to hide a violation. The officers didn't even glance at me. Their attention locked on her like a spotlight. One stepped closer and picked up the broken lock. This is government property, he said. Karen swallowed hard. I didn't know. You cut into a restricted vehicle, another officer said. That's a federal offense. Her face drained of all color. Her mouth opened and closed silently like a fish struggling to breathe. Everything she thought she controlled disappeared in seconds. She didn't run the community. She didn't have authority. She didn't own the streets. And she definitely had no power over a task force Jeep. This wasn't her world anymore. This was mine. And Karen had just cut her way into the biggest mistake of her HOA career. Karen didn't become a problem overnight. Her obsession with power didn't appear suddenly when she cut my gate lock. It had been growing for months. Slowly, like a weed twisting through the foundation of the neighborhood, tightening its grip until everyone felt trapped by her presence. It started small, a warning letter here, a rude remark there, a complaint about lawn height or trash cans being visible from the street for too long. But as time passed, warnings became threats, the notes became fines, and the power she wielded in her own mind multiplied until she truly believed she ruled our entire community. She walked the neighborhood, with a clipboard tucked under her arm like it was a badge, inspecting driveways as if she were conducting a criminal investigation. She pointed at children riding their bikes and shouted about safety violations. She lectured elderly residents about mailbox colors. She chased delivery drivers away for parking incorrectly. Every day she created a new rule, a new restriction, a new imaginary law she expected everyone to follow without question. And the worst part? Most people were too tired or too intimidated to fight her. They paid her fake fines. They apologized when she berated them. They played along with her pretend authority because they didn't want trouble. Karen fed on that fear. It made her bold. It made her dangerous. Each victory inflated her ego until she truly believed she could decide what stayed in the neighborhood and what didn't. That's why the moment she first saw my Jeep, she fixated on it like a predator discovering prey. It was a matte black tactical Jeep. Reinforced frame, heavy tires, upgraded interior, and compartments that didn't belong on a normal civilian vehicle. Most neighbors barely noticed it because I kept it inside my fenced driveway. But Karen noticed everything. And once she laid eyes on it, she decided it violated her perfect pastel-colored vision of the neighborhood. I remember the first time she brought it up. I was unloading groceries when she marched across the sidewalk wearing one of her blazer and clipboard combinations. That vehicle, she said, pointing with her pen like she was marking evidence, is not up to community aesthetic standards. I raised an eyebrow. Aesthetic standards? It's my driveway. It's too aggressive, she insisted, too dark, too militarized. This is a family-friendly development. We won't have intimidating vehicles sitting around scaring the children. It doesn't scare anyone, I replied. It sits behind a locked fence, she scoffed. Only because I told you to put it behind a fence. She hadn't told me anything, but that didn't matter to her. In her world, she believed she had authority over every gate, every fence, every driveway, every vehicle. She believed that because she imagined the power existed, it automatically did. When she realized I wasn't rushing to get rid of the Jeep, something shifted in her. She began escalating. Within a week, she sent 2 violation notices, claiming the Jeep created a visual disturbance. The next week, she added a second complaint, accusing the Jeep of being unsafe. Then a third claiming it was non-compliant with HOA community image standards, a phrase she invented on the spot. I ignored the letters. They weren't real. But to Karen, ignoring her authority was a challenge, a threat to her imaginary throne. And Karen didn't tolerate threats. She wanted obedience. She demanded control. The truth was, Karen had no idea the Jeep belonged to a police task force. It wasn't just a hobby vehicle or something I bought for fun. It was assigned to me as part of my cooperation with a specialized unit, outfitted with communications gear, encrypted tracking devices, and modifications that civilians wouldn't understand. She saw matte black paint and big tires. She didn't see the sensitive equipment. She didn't see the federal tags hidden in the registration. She didn't see the invisible protection around the vehicle. She only saw something she didn't like. And when Karen didn't like something, she tried to remove it by force. In her mind, cutting my gate lock wasn't a crime. It was leadership. Taking my Jeep wasn't theft. It was community improvement. She didn't stop to think about legality. She didn't consider consequences. She didn't think she needed to. When she spoke, people usually stepped aside. When she threatened fines, residents usually paid. When she knocked on doors, people lowered their voices. But I was different. I didn't fear her. I didn't submit. I didn't shrink back when she puffed up her chest and shouted HOA rules that didn't exist, and that made her furious. Karen needed control like other people needed air. The more someone resisted her, the more her ego demanded she crush them. That's why she didn't call the HOA board before cutting my lock. She didn't check the bylaws. She didn't verify authority. She didn't care. She stood in my driveway with her bolt cutters, fueled by pure anger, convinced she was teaching me a lesson. To her, I wasn't a homeowner. I was a problem. But Karen's pride had a fatal flaw. She never looked past the surface of anything. She never thought to ask why my Jeep was reinforced, why I kept it behind a lock, why I always parked it carefully, or why I never allowed anyone near it. She never questioned why the vehicle registration wasn't on public file. She never wondered why the tow truck driver hesitated that morning, or why he kept glancing at the Jeep like it was something dangerous. Karen only cared about one thing, proving her power. She believed cutting the lock would make me respect her. She believed towing the Jeep would humiliate me. She believed she would win. She didn't know the Jeep was already sending alerts to law enforcement. She didn't know a task force would be on their way within minutes. She didn't know her bolt cutter stunt had triggered a chain reaction far beyond her HOA world. If Karen had paused, just once, to think logically, she might have realized something was off. But she wasn't thinking logically. She was thinking emotionally. She wanted to feel powerful. She wanted to feel feared. She wanted to feel in control. So she did the one thing she should never have done. She crossed from bullying into criminal behavior. She stepped from annoyance into federal territory. And by the time she realized her mistake, 3 black SUVs were already speeding down the street. The tow truck hadn't even fully secured the hook to my Jeep when the neighborhood fell under a sudden, unnatural silence. Even the birds seemed to sense something was coming. Karen didn't notice. She was too busy straightening her HOA badge lanyard, trying to look official after breaking into private property. She kept glancing at me with that smug, self-satisfied smirk, the kind that told me she believed she had finally defeated the one homeowner she couldn't intimidate. But then the sound came. Low, powerful, growing closer. Engines, not the kind civilians drove. Engines tuned for speed, pursuit, and precision. Engines that didn't purr, they roared. Karen's smirk twitched. The tow truck driver's head snapped upward. Even I felt the vibration roll through the asphalt as 3 large black SUVs appeared at the far end of the street, sweeping into the neighborhood like shadows moving with purpose. No markings, no decals, just matte black muscle moving fast. Karen squinted and took a step forward. Who on earth? She didn't finish, because the SUVs accelerated, swerving around a corner with practiced synchronicity. Tires gripped the pavement like claws. The lead vehicle braked hard in front of my driveway, the other 2 flanking it with perfect formation, boxing in the tow truck. Doors burst open. Men stepped out, not the kind Karen was used to bossing around. These weren't neighborhood volunteers or mail carriers she could bully. They wore tactical gear, bulletproof vests, utility belts, radios with encrypted channel. Their expressions were focused, sharp, and very, very serious. Karen went pale. One of them, the team leader, spotted my Jeep instantly. His jaw tightened, and he moved toward it with urgency. His fingers traced the broken lock on the gate. His eyes narrowed at the tow truck's raised hook. Then he turned to me. "You didn't touch the vehicle, correct?" "I didn't," I replied. His nod was curt, controlled, the nod of someone trying to keep anger in check. Then he turned to Karen. "What happened here?" he demanded. Karen pointed straight at me, panic already cracking her voice. He called a tow. I came to enforce HOA property standards." The officer blinked once, slowly, dangerously. He stared at her clipboard as if it were an alien object. "You enforce what?" Karen swallowed, twisting her fingers nervously. "Community rules. And this Jeep is—" "That Jeep," he snapped, stepping closer, "is restricted police property." She froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She looked at the Jeep again, the matte black paint she hated so much, the reinforced frame, the tinted windows, finally seeing what she had never bothered to understand. The officer picked up the broken lock from the ground and held it between his gloved fingers. You cut this? Karen shook her head wildly. No, he did. It was already broken when The tow truck driver raised a hand timidly. No, she cut it. I saw the whole thing. Karen whipped toward him. You liar! The officer's voice thundered across the driveway. Hey! Karen jumped like she'd been electrocuted. You cut into a restricted law enforcement vehicle, he continued. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Karen clutched her clipboard like a shield. I'm the HOA president. I have authority. A second officer stepped forward, eyebrows raised in disbelief. Authority to break locks, to seize what isn't yours? Karen stammered. It violated the color code. It wasn't approved. It was intimidating. One of the officers actually laughed, a short, humorless sound. Lady, that's the point. Karen blinked rapidly, sweat forming at her hairline. She looked at the Jeep as though it had transformed into a bomb. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know? You weren't supposed to touch it, the team leader hissed. Another officer inspected the tow hook. If this vehicle had been lifted even an inch, it would have triggered a level 3 tamper alert. Karen's eyes widened. A what? The officer gave her a cold smile. A security alert that notifies every unit in a 50-mile radius that someone is stealing our equipment. Her face twisted in confusion and fear. But I was just doing my job. You're not law enforcement, he snapped. You're not even security. You're a civilian who broke a lock and tried to tow a government vehicle. Her breath started coming in short, rapid gasps. The officer stepped forward again, not aggressively, but with calm domination. Ma'am, you need to provide legal identification and documentation authorizing your actions. Karen desperately flipped through her clipboard. I have the HOA handbook, page 6, appearance compliance. We ask for legal authorization, the officer repeated. Not your personal scrapbook of nonsense. Karen's hands shook so badly her papers flew out, scattering across the driveway. The wind lifted them, carrying some into the street. She scrambled after them, dropping to her knees like she was gathering the pieces of her collapsing authority. The officers didn't move. They didn't help. They didn't intervene. They simply watched, arms crossed, while Karen chased her papers with trembling fingers. Then the team leader turned to me. You handled this well. Stay where you are. We're making calls. He stepped Ed aside and lifted his radio. The tone of his voice changed completely. Clipped, precise, professional, controlled. This is Bravo 3. Civilian attempted tamper confirmed. Lock compromised. Property damaged. Tow activation prevented. Karen froze mid-reach. Tow activation prevented. That meant she had been seconds away from triggering something. Catastrophic. Another officer approached her. Stand up, ma'am. Karen forced a smile. So this is a misunderstanding. We can fix this. I just need to... Stand up, he repeated, colder. She rose slowly, legs trembling. You are not under arrest yet, he said, but you are being detained while we verify the extent of the damage. Karen's face twisted. Detained? You can't detain me. I run this community. The task force leader turned toward her, voice like ice. Not anymore. Karen finally crumbled. Her knees sagged, her breath hitched. And for the first time since she stepped onto my property, she looked like she understood exactly what she had done. The neighborhood watched from behind curtains. Children peeked from windows. Residents whispered to each other. Karen wasn't the ruler of the community anymore. She was the villain, the criminal, the woman who tried to steal a police vehicle without knowing what she had provoked, and the task force officers weren't finished with her yet. The neighborhood looked frozen in time. Curtains barely moved as residents peeked out at the scene unfolding on my driveway. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the entire community understood something massive was happening, something none of them had ever witnessed before. The task force officers surrounded my Jeep like surgeons circling a patient, each one taking a different position, examining different parts of the vehicle. They moved with the seriousness of people who knew that even a single wrong detail could mean something dangerous. Karen stood a few feet away, stiff as a statue, her hands still trembling. Her entire expression had changed from arrogant confidence to pure panic. It was like she had suddenly realized she had been playing in a world of adults with the mentality of a child. Her clipboard lay abandoned on the ground, its pages scattered like broken pieces of her authority. The lead officer crouched beside the Jeep, pressing 2 fingers onto a tracking panel hidden near the chassis. The panel lit up blue for a second, confirming activation. His face tightened with irritation. He didn't say anything at first, but the silence was enough to warn everyone that the situation was worse than Karen or anyone else imagined. A second officer opened the rear compartment of the Jeep. Inside were sealed equipment cases, coded, numbered, locked. Karen had been inches away from towing off gear worth more than her entire house. Not because it was expensive, because it was restricted. The second officer muttered, "Jesus." She had no idea what she was touching. The lead officer stood and turned sharply toward Karen. "Did you know this vehicle contained tactical equipment?" Karen shook her head violently. "No, I didn't know. I thought it was just an ugly Jeep." He blinked slowly. "You broke the lock of a law enforcement vehicle without knowing what was inside? It violated community standards," she shrieked, her voice cracking like glass. "The color, the appearance, it wasn't allowed." The officer stared at her like she had spoken another language. "Ma'am, nothing about community rules allows you to tamper with government property." Karen didn't have a response. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Another officer approached the group holding a tablet, reviewing security footage from neighborhood cameras. "Sir," he said to the team leader, "we have full video of the lock cutting. Clear A. Time-stamped." Karen's eyes widened in horror. You can't use that. Those are private cameras." "No," the officer corrected. "Those are your neighbor's cameras. And they gave us permission." Karen whipped around to look at the houses. To her shock, people were stepping out onto porches, slowly gathering near the sidewalk. Some crossed their arms, some whispered angrily. Some looked ashamed they had ever allowed Karen to bully them. But none looked like they were coming to defend her. The task force leader turned to the small crowd. "Did anyone witness the event?" Hands shot up, not one, not two, nearly 10. Parents came forward first, then an elderly couple, then a teenager who had been filming from behind his truck. Karen gasped as each person approached, as if each one was slapping her with a new reality. One neighbor said, "I saw her climbing the fence with those cutters. She looked furious." Another added, "She told me last week she was going to deal with the Jeep once and for all. I didn't know she meant this." A third resident, an older man clutching a cane, murmured, "She's been threatening us for months with fake rules. Someone had to stop her." The task force officers took statements methodically, their voices calm but strict. Karen grew more frantic with each passing moment. "This is all a misunderstanding," she tried again. "I was doing my job," a nearby mother snapped. "You don't have a job, Karen. You're the HOA president, not the police." Karen spun toward her. "I maintain community order." "No," the woman replied firmly. "You control everyone. There's a difference." The task force leader didn't intervene. He let the truth land on Karen like weight she couldn't lift. Then he stepped forward again. "Karen, we need to inspect your communication with the tow company." "My communication?" she repeated, voice trembling. "Yes. We need proof, T. His tow was legally authorized. Any texts, emails, documents. Hand them over." Karen hesitated. Her eyes darted. Her face flushed. She knew her authorization wasn't real. She hadn't gone through the HOA board. She hadn't filed a complaint. She hadn't even written an official notice. She just called the tow company with confidence and hoped her loud voice would be enough to make people obey. I don't have documentation," she whispered. The officer leaned in. "Because it doesn't exist?" Karen bit her lip so hard she nearly drew blood. The tow truck driver stepped up awkwardly. "She told me it was approved by county enforcement. She showed me that little badge she wears." The officer turned to Karen slowly. "You impersonated a government official?" Karen shook her head violently. "No, I just acted with authority. That's what impersonation is," the officer said. Karen's face crumpled. The investigation intensified. Officers took pictures of the broken lock, the bolt cutters, the Jeep's compartments, and the position of the tow hook. Every detail was documented, every angle captured. Neighbors continued giving statements, some shyly, some with relief, all of them telling the same story. Karen wasn't enforcing HOA rules. She was using them to intimidate people. She had crossed boundaries again and again. She believed she was above the law, and now she had crossed the one boundary that mattered most, the one between civilian authority and law enforcement. After nearly 30 minutes, the team leader lowered his tablet and faced Karen. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "we've confirmed that you caused property damage, attempted to seize a government vehicle, impersonated authority, and endangered law enforcement equipment." Karen's breathing became uneven. "But I didn't know, I didn't mean—" "You didn't think," the officer corrected. "That's the problem, nay?" Neighbors whispered, some nodded, a few quietly recorded the moment on their phones. Karen looked around desperately, searching for someone, anyone, who might defend her. But nobody moved, because the truth had finally been revealed, not just the crime she committed today, but the months of manipulation, threats, and fear she had inflicted on everyone. The neighborhood had been living under Karen's rules. But now the law was standing in her driveway, and her imaginary power was evaporating for good. The moment the task force finished gathering evidence, a heavy tension settled over the neighborhood, the kind that always appears right before something irreversible happens. The officers moved with deliberate purpose now, no longer investigating but preparing to act. Karen must have sensed the shift because she began backing away from them, shaking her head as if she could rewind the last hour simply by refusing to accept it. "No," she whispered. No, this isn't happening. You can't do this. I'm the HOA president," but titles meant nothing now. The task force leader stepped forward, his expression unreadable, his voice level and professional. "Karen, based on the evidence collected and the statements provided by multiple witnesses, you are being detained for the following offenses." Karen raised both hands, shaking them dramatically. Wait, you don't understand. I was enforcing community safety. I was doing my duty." The officer ignored her interruption. "For property damage, unlawful entry into secured property, impersonation of authority, and attempted theft of government equipment." Karen's eyes widened so far it looked painful. "Theft? I wasn't stealing. I was towing a violation." The officer tilted his head. "A violation according to who? You?" "Yes," she snapped. "According to me. According to the HOA. I make the rules. I decide what's allowed." Several neighbors audibly groaned. One woman muttered, "This is embarrassing." Another whispered to her husband. She finally snapped. Karen continued ranting, her voice pitching higher with every sentence. "You can't arrest me. I have immunity. HOA immunity. I'm the highest authority in this neighborhood." The officer blinked at her slowly. "HOA immunity is not real." Karen froze. It was as if someone had unplugged her brain for a moment. The officer repeated more firmly, "There is no such thing as HOA immunity." Karen's mouth fell open. But the handbook says, "Your handbook is not law." She staggered backward like she had been physically struck. But the board agreed. They voted. "I'm the president, and presidents," the officer said calmly, "are still citizens, and citizens don't get to break locks, trespass, impersonate authority, or tamper with law enforcement vehicles." Karen began shaking her head again, more violently now. No, you're wrong. I was protecting the community. I was doing what nobody else had the courage to do. I was keeping things in order." The officer stepped behind her. Karen turned around. For a moment she didn't move. She just stood there, trembling, staring at me with a wild, desperate expression, like she was begging me to somehow undo everything that was happening to her. "You," she hissed. "This is your fault. If you had just repainted your Jeep, none of this would have happened." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She had created her own disaster, then walked directly into it. The officer repeated sternly, "Karen, turn around." This time she obeyed, but she did so slowly, stiffly, like each motion was a punishment. When the cuffs clicked around her wrists, she gasped so loudly neighbors across the street stepped closer. "This is a mistake," she cried. "A misunderstanding. I'm not a criminal." The officer Cal. "Double-check the restraints. You are being detained. Everything else will be handled at the station." Karen twisted toward the watching neighbors. "Tell them I'm not a criminal. Tell them I was doing the right thing. Someone say something." But nobody spoke. Not one person stepped forward. In fact, the crowd took a collective step back, a silent acknowledgement that they had lived under her tyranny long enough. If anything, some of them looked relieved. Others looked angry. A few even looked disappointed that they hadn't confronted her sooner. Karen's panic rose when she realized no one was defending her. "You're all ungrateful," she screamed, voice cracking. "I kept this neighborhood perfect. I protected you from ugliness, from violations, from chaos." A teenager scoffed loudly. "You protected us from nothing." That made her snap. "I am the law here," she shrieked. The task force leader stepped right into her line of sight. "No, you aren't." Her mouth trembled. Her lip quivered. Her entire body sagged like the truth had finally crushed her. The officer guided her toward the unmarked SUV. She tried to walk on her own but stumbled halfway, forcing him to steady her. The moment the door opened, she turned back one last time, hoping, praying, that someone would intervene. She looked at the tow truck driver first. He held up both hands and shook his head. "Lady, I barely even know you." She looked at the neighbors. Some shook their heads, some crossed their arms. One older man spat on the sidewalk in disgust. Finally, she looked at me. "You're ruining my life," she whispered. I said nothing. Her life wasn't being ruined by me. It was being ruined by her actions. The officer gently but firmly helped her into the SUV. When the door shut, the sound echoed across the quiet street. Another officer approached the tow truck, tapping on the driver's window. "Discon. CT the vehicle," he ordered. The driver nodded so fast he nearly strained his neck. He moved like someone defusing a bomb. The hook detached from my Jeep in seconds, and he scrambled back into his truck, eager to be as far from the situation as possible. As Karen's SUV pulled away, several neighbors sighed in relief. Some even clapped quietly. It wasn't joy, it was release. For the first time in a long time, the community felt free. The task force took statements from a few final witnesses before turning to me with a nod of respect. "You handled everything correctly," the leader said. "We'll take it from here." And just like that, the vehicles rolled out of the neighborhood, leaving behind a stunned silence and a driveway still littered with the broken pieces of Karen's reign. Her meltdown was over. Her authority was gone, and the law, the real law, was finally in charge. The neighborhood felt different the moment Karen's SUV disappeared around the corner. It was like someone finally lifted a heavy blanket off everyone's shoulders. The street, once tense and quiet, slowly began to breathe again. Windows opened, doors creaked. People stepped out of their houses cautiously at first, as if checking whether Karen might suddenly pop back out with her clipboard raised high. But she was gone, truly gone, and the air felt lighter for the first time in months. I stood in my driveway, the broken lock still lying where she dropped it, my Jeep untouched and safe once more. The task force officers had left only a few minutes earlier, but their presence lingered in the atmosphere like a seal of protection. Where Karen's fake authority had suffocated people, the real authority had restored order in ways no HOA board ever could. The first person to approach me was Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman from across the street. She walked slowly, clutching a small paper bag. Her DS trembled as she offered it to me. "I baked muffins," she whispered. "It's not much, but thank you." I smiled gently. "You didn't have to do that." "No," she said with more strength. "I did. I should have spoken up earlier. She bullied all of us. I was scared of her, but I was more scared of making things difficult." "I'm sorry." I shook my head. "You don't need to apologize." But she insisted. "I do. Because people like her grow strong when good people stay silent," or words struck something inside me. She wasn't wrong. Karen had become powerful, not because she had real authority, but because people were afraid to challenge her. Fear had held the entire neighborhood hostage. Until today. Soon, more residents approached. A father who admitted Karen fined him 3 times for parking too confidently. A young mother who confessed Karen threatened her for letting her toddler chalk on the sidewalk. A college student who revealed Karen would patrol past his house every night, staring into his yard like she was waiting to catch him doing something wrong. One by one, they walked up to me. Not because I was a hero, not because I worked with the task force, not because I had a Jeep equipped with restricted gear, but because I stood up to Karen when no one else could. Some apologized, some thanked me, some simply said, "It's finally over." The HOA board eventually gathered at the community clubhouse. Without Karen shouting over them, they looked like lost children trying to remember how to run a neighborhood. After 30 minutes, 2 of the board members knocked on my door and asked if I would attend their emergency vote. I agreed. The meeting was surprisingly calm. Without Karen's dominating presence, the board functioned like normal human beings. They pulled up Karen's rulebook, an overstuffed binder filled with highlighted pages, handwritten notes, aggressive red-eye, NK comments, and new rules she had added without approval. "This," one member said, dropping the binder on the table with a heavy thud, "needs to go." The board unanimously voted to remove Karen permanently from any HOA position. Her access to neighborhood systems funds, forms, and files was revoked instantly. They shredded copies of her fake violations, wiped her name from every letterhead, and formally apologized to the neighborhood in a written statement. Next came the rules. Nearly every one of Karen's additions was discarded: the driveway inspection rule, the mailbox height rule, the no dark colors vehicle rule, the no visible tools rule, and the infamous trash bin must be removed within 90 seconds of pickup rule. The board realized she wasn't enforcing standards, she was enforcing control. By the end of the meeting, the HOA looked more like a normal community group and less like a dictatorship. When I returned home, the task force had already sent a unit to replace my broken gate lock. They installed a heavy-duty model, reinforced steel, coated latch, tamper-resistant. The officer in charge nodded at me once he finished. "We appreciate your cooperation today," he said. You kept things from escalating. I shrugged. She escalated it enough on her own. He cracked a small smile. True. But you handled her better than most would have. Once they left, I finally walked up to the Jeep and placed my hand on the hood. It still felt warm from the sun, still strong, still mine. Karen had come dangerously close to starting something that could have gone very differently. If the tow truck had lifted it even a little, the vehicle's tamper alert would have triggered a regional lockdown. Roads sealed, helicopters deployed, units activated. Karen had been seconds away from throwing an entire division into chaos, but she didn't know because she never asked, never listened, never cared. Karen wasn't evil. She was blind with arrogance. And arrogance is louder than wisdom, heavier than humility, and far more dangerous than ignorance. As evening settled in, the neighborhood transformed. Families came out for walks. Children rode their bikes freely again. Neighbors waved at one another instead of hiding behind curtains. Laughter echoed across lawns, not nervous whispers. Without Karen watching their every move, people began to remember what it felt like to live without fear. For the first time in months, the sunset looked peaceful. I sat on my porch, sipping a cold drink, watching the street return to life. My Jeep sat proudly in the driveway, the new lock gleaming under the fading light. People walked by and nodded politely, some offering smiles, others simply relieved to see things back to normal. Then a teenager passing by gave a playful salute and said, "Nobody's ever stealing that Jeep again." I laughed. "Nobody's ever touching it again." He nodded. "Yeah. And nobody's messing with you either." As the sky darkened, I realized he was right. The neighborhood had changed, not because Karen was gone, but because people had finally seen the truth. Authority built on fear collapses the moment someone stands against it. And when the task force arrived, it proved another truth. You can push a community, you can be a neighborhood, you can even break a gate, but you should never, ever mess with a police task force vehicle or the person who drives it.